Today, we will calculate Bitcoin intrinsic value. Reveal Bitcoin forecast price until 2030. We have with us the data scientist who will reveal his secret and model. We also have other guests that are pro and against Bitcoin. Do you think Bitcoin reach $1 million?
I will not reveal now, but my model will answer that question at the end of this video. What do you think is the current intrinsic value of Bitcoin?
For me, Bitcoin does not have any value.
It's huge, the price will be up to the moon.
Welcome to uCrypto. Here you can find a summary of what is happening in the crypto space. I am the beta version of artificial intelligence that with your help I will grow. Everything that we provide on this channel is purely for guidance, informational and educational purposes.
We live in a society that seems to have only extreme opinions, with no intermediate positions. We noticed this behavior in several discussions, and the same happens with Bitcoin. Let's hear some opinions.
But the currency should be the dollar. And when you have things like that out there, Stuart, you know what happens is you really lose something. It takes the edge off of the dollar and the importance of the dollar. Bitcoin, it just seems like a scam. I don't like it because it's another currency competing against the dollar.
But the bottom line was that what's happening right now in cryptocurrency, like Bitcoin and Dogecoin, it's a wild west out there. And it makes it not a good way to buy and sell things, and not a good investment, and an environmental disaster. So do we need some regulation around this? You bet we do.
It will disrupt gold, so its market cap has to be 10 trillion or more, because that's the market cap of gold. So Bitcoin's hovering around 1 trillion now. We still think it's a 10, at least conservatively a 10x from here. So even at 35,000, it feels like a really good buying opportunity long term, because we think at a $10 trillion market cap, we think one Bitcoin will be worth $500,000. And we think that could happen inside this decade, definitely the next 5 years. So we're hodlers at least until $500,000. And then at that point, you won't even have to sell because you can borrow off it or whatever.
If companies in the S&P 500 were to put 1% of their cash into Bitcoin, that would increase the price of Bitcoin by $40,000. Today, it's close to $30,000. So that's more than a double right there. If we saw 10%, of course, that would add 400,000. And
You are confused. Don't worry, everyone else is. Who is right? Instead of listening to opinions, we need to try to calculate the intrinsic value of Bitcoin. The price of a good is affected by supply and demand. We can see this in various types of goods such as gold, housing, corn, oil, among others. Bitcoin is no different. This model is based on the stock model of free cash flow, very used by YouTubers, but you can fully understand this model. Read the book, Rule Number 1. Now I'll turn the floor over to the data scientist.
First, we will analyze the Visa company, and after using a similar approach, we will analyze the Bitcoin. You can download the Visa report and get all information. To be easy, I will copy these values and create a table. Visa is making most of the money from processing fees. These are Visa's base rates in competition. This will come in handy when we start analyzing Bitcoin. As we can observe, the values are between 1.4% and 3.5%. Total volume, including payments and cash volume, $11.3 trillion. Payments volume, $8.8 trillion. Transactions processed on Visa's networks, 140 billion. If we do the calculation transactions divide by payments, we will have an average payments per transaction of $62.5. Active cards, 3.5 billion. Net revenues, 21.8 billion. Operating expenses, 7.8 billion. I already calculate free cash flow, and we will have 9.7 billion. Several pages or YouTubers explain how to calculate this. But basically, free cash flow represents the cash available for a company to repay creditors or pay dividends and interest to investors. It will be using the free cash flow that we will calculate the intrinsic value and make the forecast. It appears that Visa has not suffered from COVID-19 in terms of payments, transactions, and cards. When we're looking for net revenues and free cash flow, it seems they dropped. Perhaps you have the following question: if the volume of payments is the same, why did the net income decrease? This is because data processing revenue is half of the total revenue. Another question: if I have 8.8 trillion, why did I get only 11 billion in data processing revenue? I expected at least 10 times as much. If anyone knows why, please leave a comment. Now we are ready to calculate the intrinsic value of Visa stock. The current data is: basic shares outstanding, 1.9 billion. Market cap, 452 billion. The stock price at the time that I made the analyses was $231.44. There are several methods to calculate intrinsic value, but here we will use a simple formula. The intrinsic value is equal to free cash flow multiplied by 20 and divides everything by the basic shares outstanding. This 20 means, how many times free cash flow are you willing to pay to purchase that stock? The defensive investor wants to find good companies under 15 times the free cash flow. Some investors are willing to pay more than 20 times free cash flow when it is a growing stock and the company has a huge moat. To be fair, we'll use 20. Last year Visa only has 9.7 billion of free cash flow, so if we use it to calculate the intrinsic value, the stock $99.33. To avoid wrong assumptions, it is better to take an average. As you know, some companies have good and bad years. You can choose 3, 5, or 10 years depending on your strategy. In this case, let's make 3 years. Not improve a lot, we still only have a value of $115.72. Let's be a little more optimistic. We know that last year was a year with too many restrictions, and now everything will return to normal. Let's choose the average of 2018 and 2019. Even with 12.1 billion, it seems the current price value is very far away from intrinsic value. On the YouTube channel Learning to Invest, in April 2019, he is saying a goodbye was below 130. In May 2021, the YouTube channel Finding Alpha is saying the intrinsic value is 162. But he only buys the stock with a margin safety of 25%, so this means $122. Even using data from this current quarter, it will be difficult for Visa to reach the 14 billion free cash flow this year. So, the investors are paying at least 32 times the cash flow. We can conclude this stock is very expensive. Now that we know the current value, we can try to predict the future. To simplify, if we assume the shares are the same in 2030. Depending on your assumptions of the free cash flow, we can have stock between $200 and $550. Boring. Let's go to action. Now we are ready to analyze Bitcoin. Blockchain is like a public database that contains all records from creation to the present. When you make a transaction, it is recorded in the blockchain. No one can change the past, but everyone can get or check the past of all records.
Hi there, don't be stupid, don't use Bitcoin for criminal activities. Bitcoins can be tracked by anyone, it's an open database. For this it is better to go straight to the police station and confess the crime. You may be entitled to a reduction in the sentence. You can try the Monero, but they say the FBI has already cracked the code, so your best option is still the dollar.
Sorry, some issue happened, let's continue. For a data scientist, the blockchain is amazing because all data is public and easily obtained since its creation. The data was collected from blockchain.com. For an easy understanding, above we have the Visa company table, and below Bitcoin. Each line is more or less equivalent from a statistical point of view. Trade volume 60 million bitcoins. Trade volume estimate $630 billion US dollars. Total transactions 110 million. Average trade per transaction of $5,700 versus $62 of Visa. If we look at the median is about $400. Here an example of the last 24 hours. Average trade per transaction $115,000, and the median transaction $1,100. That's because Bitcoin has at least two purposes. First, using it as a bank and transferring large amounts of money quickly. Second, use it as a credit card, but here to make the transaction even cheaper, or almost free, this operation is done using the Layer 2 solution called Lightning Network. Lightning Network will make multiple transactions, and after some time in just one transaction will update the Bitcoin blockchain. This means to us that one transaction of $5,000 can be several small transactions from several different people. Imagine this. You have a prepaid card that we need to charge to have very cheap transactions. Look for this example. This person bought a product on PlayStation and paid 11 Satoshi in fees that are equivalent to $0.0036. I am not using Lightning Network data, so this means I am using just the data that is in the Bitcoin blockchain. This could have some impact on this model if Lightning Network grows a lot, because we are losing some trade volume. Bitcoin wallets 60 million. The first conclusion is, the use of Bitcoin is growing and faster than Visa. The number of wallets compared to Visa cards is 50 times smaller. This means lots of potentials to grow because we still have just a few people using it. But trade volume is only 18 times smaller. It seems this year will be just 8 times smaller. If we assume Bitcoin is a company and compare it to Visa, we will say that Bitcoin's market capitalization needs to be at least 10 times smaller than Visa. Unless the profit margins are very different. The reality is that Bitcoin has a larger market capitalization than Visa.
Please give me a like.
In this image, we have Bitcoin price in the logarithm view. The red is maximum, in blue the minimum, and the dash the median. We can easily see bear and bull market phases. Looking for the same data on the table, we can see minimum price is increasing every year except for 2015. In green, we have the halving event. This means that every 4 years it halves the Bitcoin creation per block. We can see this event has a huge impact on price, normally in the next year. It is easy to understand why. If demand continues to grow at the same rate, but we decrease supply, the price will increase. Now we need to calculate free cash flow, but Bitcoin is not a company, so we need to find a way to estimate free cash flow. Imagine the oil company. Free cash flow will be correlated with the price of oil. If the price is high, they have more profit. If it is low, they need to reduce the cost to avoid losses. Over the past 20 years, oil futures have gone from $10 to $100, going back several times to less than $50, and recovered again. If you are buying an oil company, you better try to understand oil supply and demand. That way, you can calculate the intrinsic value of oil and understand if the oil company's current margins are good enough to handle these price fluctuations. I made exactly that for Bitcoin. First, I was checking mining processing power is growing. It seems it is growing a lot since 2018, so the network has never been as secure as it is now. My first guess was to estimate free cash flow using miners' income. So I checked the miners' revenues. I estimated only 20% profit, less. It's better to invest in the S&P 500. I used that 20% profit multiply by 20 and divide it all by circulating supply. I got my Bitcoin price intrinsic value. After some analyses, what I calculated was not the intrinsic value of Bitcoin, but the value could put the Bitcoin project at risk. If we have a major crash and we reach that level, and we don't recover, it will cause several miners to shut down their equipment, which can compromise the stability and security of Bitcoin. My second approach is a little more controversial. We are using an infrastructure for which we need to pay 1.4 to 3.5% in fees. If we have an alternative that is cheaper and faster, the value for the end user will be the same. For example, Visa and MasterCard have the same service, and if Visa charge half of the fees of MasterCard, some users will swap, and we will see an increase in payments volume and transactions on the Visa. The value to the user is the difference in fees. So using this approach, if trading volume is increasing on Bitcoin, means that more users are using Bitcoin infrastructure, the value to the user is that difference in rates or speed. To use Bitcoin infrastructure, the user needs to buy Bitcoin, which will affect the demand. So, I am estimating the free cash flow on Bitcoin using the trade volume. I'm using 1, 2, and 3% of trade volume to estimate free cash flow. After I multiply by 20 and divide it all by circulating supply. As you can see, it appears that the correlation we assumed between trade volume and price looks correct. It looks like 1% is close to the minimum and 3% is close to the maximum. Therefore, I will substitute 1% for the buy level and 3% for the sell level. The 2% will be the intrinsic value. Let's now check for more years. It seems that our models adapt very well even for long periods. Let's see some graphics. The colors have the same meaning, but now we have the green color that is model output. Our intrinsic model is more optimistic until 2017, and then seems to fit right in. Our buy model fits as intrinsic value until 2017, and then fits as low level. Our sell model identifies the spikes in the bull market. Since 2017, the blockchain has evolved a lot, and this seems the users are getting more value using Bitcoin technology. But you're here to know Bitcoin's intrinsic value today, not from the past. For that, we need to estimate the Bitcoin trade volume for 2021. I checked the current trade volume so far, and now we only need to estimate the remaining half year. As I already showed, last year we had 630 billion in trade volume, and this year in the first half we already have 992 billion in trade volume. First, just for fun, let's assume there's no more trade volume this year. We know this is not possible, but it will give us a base price. We can saw the intrinsic value is $21,000. As we know in the first half of this year, the markets were crazy, and it is affecting all assets. So, I'm going to assume that in the second half of the year, we're only going to have 30% of the first half traffic. Now the intrinsic value of Bitcoin is $27,000. Now let's estimate just a few more examples: half as much traffic and twice as much. We can say that the intrinsic value of Bitcoin, if this trade volume remains the same, is around $42,000. If you're pessimistic about the rest of the year, we can say $30,000. If you're optimistic, we can say $60,000. A very defensive approach is considered a good buying opportunity when Bitcoin is close to $21,000. That way you already have a good safety margin, according to this model. Now we can try to estimate the next 10 years as we did for the Visa company. It depends on what assumptions we choose. For the past 5 years, we've received good and bad news about cryptocurrency, but the good news won the battle. The bad news is that several countries have tried to ban cryptography from mining to trade. The good news was the recognition of the technology and its acceptance. These are assumptions positive that I forecast. More employees will receive their salary in Bitcoins. More companies accepting Bitcoin as a form of payment. More companies will trade using Bitcoin. More funds will invest in Bitcoin. More countries will adopt Bitcoin. If these positive assumptions outweigh the negative ones, Bitcoin will continue to grow. Between 2013 and 2020, Bitcoin grew on average 248% in trade volume. 2021 will have a growth of around 300%, most of which has already been achieved. I'm only considering half of the trading volume we had in the first half. I am estimating an average of 62% growth between 2022 to 2030. This is a very bullish forecast, but I think the technology has now reached an acceptable state for everyone's daily use. In 2025, with this bullish forecast, the estimated value will be $200,000, and we will have the same Bitcoin trade volume that we have on the Visa network today. In 2030, we need to have 5 times more trade volume in Bitcoin than we have today on Visa, and the price can reach $1 million. Bitcoin can hit $1 million by 2030, but it's not likely to happen. That's because I expect growth to be slower and slower. Bitcoin is a very new technology, and we need time to adopt it. We have people who still prefer to have physical money instead of having cards or money in banks. Adoption is always slower than expected.
So, I just need to buy Bitcoin now, below intrinsic value, and will I be rich?
No, this model I share is the first step in understanding Bitcoin using a similar approach that we use for stocks. Now, like stocks, we need to start the investigation. What is Bitcoin moat? Do you understand why Bitcoin is better than Bitcoin Cash or Litecoin? Do you think Ethereum is a threat to Bitcoin? As a company, you need to check the management team. Here we need to check the Bitcoin core developers and verify and understand the roadmap. As it is advisable, before buying a stock, you have to understand the company and have already bought or used some of its products. For the Bitcoin is the same, you need to use it, and Bitcoin technology needs to help you in your daily life.
Why are you using the free cash flow method for Bitcoin? It doesn't make sense.
What I did was an extrapolation to help investors who are already familiar with how to calculate the intrinsic value of stocks. Here what we have is a correlation between trade volume and price. If trade volume increases, the price will increase because will affecting the demand.
Are you assured that trading volume is not affecting price, and not vice versa?
There is a great correlation between them, but looking at trade volume will give you an edge. That's why I showed also trade volume in Bitcoins and not just in dollars. We can use the most advanced models and monitor the trade volume relative to exchange and trade volume relative to other activities. That way you can understand what is the impact of price on trade volume.
After buying Bitcoin as an investor, I just need to wait, right?
That's up to you, but you have several options at your disposal depending on the level of risk you want to take. You can lend your Bitcoin and receive up 10% of interest per year. Or you can use Bitcoin as collateral and move your Bitcoins to decentralized finance and short Tesla, dollar, euro, or buy Microsoft, ETF, FTSE 100, gold, oil. Your imagination is your limit.
Thanks for watching. For you, what is the intrinsic value of Bitcoin? Leave a comment. Let me know if you want more videos like this. Goodbye.